Congress calling for UFO hearings, both in the House and the Senate. So it's obviously becoming very important that we believe UFOs are visiting the Earth. They may be, they may not be. I wanted to talk a little bit about Roswell because I talked about the Aurora, Texas landing and how that didn't seem particularly likely. Now, first, I have to express the fact that I have an extreme bias on this one. I worked for the organization that's the uh, follow on organization to the one that was actually flying the nuclear detection balloons, one of which came down here in Roswell, but it's a UFO. So uh, I saw the documentation on it. It's pretty conclusive. Yes, they used a cover story initially because they didn't want Americans to know how closely we thought how close we thought the Russians were to setting off a nuclear device. And we also didn't want to give away our methodologies of how we were going to be able to detect it from across the world. Um, the thing is this was always described as a scattering of terrestrial materials, tinfoil, rubber, and wood. Now, this incident actually didn't gain much traction with anybody until after 1978, when one of the UFOologists glommed onto the story and ran away with a little bit, ended up talking to some people in Roswell who didn't have direct contact with what went on, and they had much wilder stories. They talked about mysterious space metal. Eventually, we started hearing about bodies in the wreckage, and then we started hearing stories about that the Air Force had countered with that they were actually some kind of test dummies, when in fact neither the bodies or test dummy stories exist uh, prior to somebody manufacturing them after 1978. Roswell is a good example of a story that just basically spun out of control and got worse and worse. And I'm going to have a hard time believing other stories just because of what I've seen. So there's that. Uh, One of the things I think a lot of people don't grasp is there's a lot of earth-based and atmospheric phenomenon we really don't know or understand, which is really hard for people to grasp. You know, how can there be things out there that we don't know? When I was in the Air Force, we were starting to detect weird atmospheric anomalies that at the time we weren't allowed to talk about, but we now know them as sprites, jets, and elves. Uh, Essentially, uh, electromagnetic activity that often forms uh, almost plasma like balls and other oblong objects that race along the upper atmosphere, and it is possible they actually make it into the lower atmosphere. They might be able to skim along the oceans. Could be an explanation for a lot of things we see. In this particular photo, we're looking at uh, ball lightning caught in a scientific experiment where they were looking at other forms of lightning and caught the infamous ball lightning that's been described for hundreds of years, but a lot of scientists had doubts about. There's other things out there. The fact that the Earth has massive methane pockets that occasionally spontaneously erupt and cause all kinds of weird phenomenon to occur. And these are just a handful of things that have been around forever and we're just starting to get a handle on. I imagine there's probably a lot more out there that we're still trying to figure out. So, does that mean I'm completely against the idea that UFOs are visiting the Earth? No. I mean, is there life out there? Highly probable based on how we understand life comes about. Uh, Now the question then comes is how plentiful is it? Uh, how plentiful it is then creates the next uh, obstacle is how much of it is intelligent? Well, if it's as plentiful as we suspect, then likely some of it is intelligent as well. Something forming intellect comparable to what we have, possibly building civilizations comparable to what we have. But you start running every additional consideration makes things more and more complicated. Okay, are they advanced enough to travel the distances between the stars? Well, if you look at our neighborhood in the galaxy, uh, one might expect that most of if there were intelligent life forms on some of the star systems, I don't know, within 25 to 35 light years, they would probably be all more or less at the same level we are. Maybe. I guess it's always possible that they have some superior intellect that goes beyond ours. But again, these are significant distances. And if they have the ability to travel between the stars, are they close enough to us to where they could cross the distance between them and us in a meaningful amount of time? Meaningful meaning that they would live to see the end of their journey, or it would be even worth it to them to be sending something out this far. And then the next question is how long do intelligent species survive? Do they eventually either wipe themselves out, uh, collapse, whatever? So even if there's a civilization that's been around long enough to develop the kind of tech they need, and they are close enough to travel the great distances, uh, are they able to do it before their civilization eventually collapses? We have indications that civilization reached a pretty decent height, probably at least Bronze Age level, and then we had a great collapse some 9 to 10,000 years ago. Maybe it's a cycle. Maybe it happens a lot to civilizations. So, in short, I think it seems very unlikely that aliens are visiting our planet and could make it here. But I still think it's possible. I just think it's an a very outside chance. So the question is what we are seeing now the same thing we were seeing in the 1940s? 1940s is when we really started kind of getting into the whole UFO thing. British referred to them as Foo Fighters, these strange anomalies that were occurring out there that he couldn't make much sense of. Um, so the reason I ask the question is if these are the same things, because it creates a bizarre question. Okay, if aliens are traveling the vast distances to make it to us, and they've been doing it since at least 1940, they don't seem to want to make direct contact with us. But they have the technology to get here, yet they don't have the technology to really conceal themselves. Now, I guess that could be explained by a truly alien mindset. They just don't act the same way we do. And one thing I found interesting in this photo, and it was just kind of accidental, uh, looks suspiciously similar to the ball lightning that showed up in the photo a few back. Now, it seems coincidental that the size of the ships seem to be getting smaller, just as we have the ability to miniaturize things. If you look back to most of the reported sightings, 40s, 50s, and 60s, generally the ships seem to be rather big. But as we're getting more and more towards our time frame, and now it seems like a lot of these ships are small, uh, more like more like drone technology. And to me, that kind of hints of terrestrial origin, because I mean, if the nature of the size of the vessels are changing over time, and again, that could be uh, bad observer phenomenon, where I mean, just because you witness something doesn't mean you witness it with absolute fidelity. But it seems like the small ship thing is a more modern idea, whereas the large ship thing seems to be more common in the past. Um, so it hints at the idea that minds are seeing these objects, knowing about miniaturization. So either two ways to look at it. One, whoever's building these is learning how to miniaturize, or those seeing them are conceptualizing a more miniaturized ship. And now, if you look, and some people have some interesting ideas about ancient sightings, where there are some things carved in rocks that look suspiciously like what we would consider a flying saucer or a UFO. And there are descriptions in some of the ancient writings that also seem to hint at the idea that maybe these things have been around for a long time. But really, that kind of complicates the whole technology and cloak issue even more. And also makes whoever these beings are, if they were visiting us over, just not decades, but centuries or possibly millennia, uh, what a truly alien mindset we're dealing with, that they're watching us, don't want to make contact, yet at the same time are incapable of concealing themselves from us. So one of the arguments that come I is the idea that some government, probably ours, has captured one of these ships. In fact, even the representative from the House of Representatives from Tennessee has been talking about the idea that we actually either have a ship or have fragments of a ship that we're trying to reverse engineer. Well, if we had something like that, well, as Dr. Strangelove would say, why not tell the world? Um, it seems really weird that you'd conceal that. I would think you'd be more inclined to reveal it, uh, just hinting at the idea. Even if you get nothing out of it, if you hint at the idea that yes, we have the spaceship and we've been reverse engineering it, uh, I think that would scare the heck out of everybody else's military. Not much reason to keep it a surprise. It would have an incredible deterrent effect. I mean, so much so that countries might consider that everything they see from our military is like the tip of the iceberg. That with this secret tech, we'd have so much more that they didn't know about, that we'd be an incredibly frightening adversary. One of the things that, if you look at how the idea that they've been around a long time, or even the fact they have, if they've been around a long time, um, it almost makes more sense to think of the idea that they're co-located with us somehow. Either a planet much closer, or possibly a long-term base, or time travel, or even Michael Knowles suggests that UFOs might be demons. But and to a certain extent, I mean, you might chuckle at the idea of demons, but in a way, extra dimensional beings that have been here all along is almost more plausible than aliens traveling incredible distances to get here. And I'm not saying I believe that. I'm just saying, if you look at it in terms of odds, looking at all the available information, if you believe they've been here for a long time, uh, it almost makes more sense that they've been here or co-located than it does that they traveled here. So why now? Why if you looked 10 years back, media would pretty much look at this with a chuckle and you wouldn't get a congressman to seriously step up on it. Now the media is bringing all these, supposed ex-spooks out and parading them around saying, yep, we know all about this and we've been hiding it from the people. And the media is just sitting there going, yeah, oh, that's interesting. Instead of, chuckling behind their back like they would have a decade ago. And Congress definitely wouldn't have touched this with a 10-foot pole, but here they are. So possibilities are it's some kind of trial balloon. Uh, Maybe there is something happening and they're trying to get a feel for how are people going to react to it before they start bringing out more substantial news. Another possibility is that we might be getting ready to test some much more advanced tech, and they're looking for some kind of plausible deniability while it's in the test phases. I mean, when you're testing something, you don't want your adversaries to know what capabilities you have. So the idea that there might be aliens flying around and then we start seeing weird things flying around uh, could give cover to some kind of weapons program. One possibility could be is, let's say, the stuff that we were seeing in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, none of it was actually alien. It was just earthbound phenomenon that was being misinterpreted or witnesses who were unreliable. And now what we're seeing is real. That's one possibility for this. It could be some form of distraction. Maybe there's things going on in Washington, D.C. that they would rather us have our attention on than what's actually going on. They'd rather us look at a UFO hearing than other things that are going on. Not necessarily the other hearings, just something. You never know. And part of this could be clicks. I mean, if there's one way to get people to actually visit your website is to talk about UFOs or Sasquatch or Megalodon or anything else that's weird and out of the ordinary. So legacy media might be just absolutely desperate for viewership, and by going into the uh, not so solid news, they get a little bit more viewership than they would have otherwise. Now, I did have one point I was going to bring up, and I've kind of changed my mind on it. I don't know what to think of it, I guess is a better way of saying. So, one of the things that kind of gets brought up is the idea that if we announce there's aliens here, it's going to cause a panic. As kind of referenced here in the photo, I kind of think it's more likely people are going to be gathering on rooftops with signs and plastic solo cups full of vodka than they are to freak out. But so I posed this question to a bunch of different people, and I got completely different answers. So my viewpoint of it is definitely a bias. I'm not going to freak out about aliens unless I absolutely know, because I don't think there's much I could do about it, if it suddenly popped up. My thoughts is if the coof didn't cause true panics. I mean, the height of panic was binge toilet paper buying. So if the coof didn't cause people to freak out to the point where they were, tearing things up and losing their minds, I'm wondering how much the aliens would cause problems if they were announced as a real thing. I suspect if you didn't lock the population down when you announced it, you probably would have little reaction at all. If everyone was going to work and the general flow of things didn't change, I don't think people would react. But enough people I talk to posing the same question. Will announcing that there's aliens cause a panic? Different people had very different reactions to it. So that means my reaction isn't necessarily typical. So that's where I'm going to end this. But if you're watching, I'd be really curious what you think about this particular question. How do you think the general populace would react to news of aliens that have been visiting us? As long as there's no, let's say the White House says, "Hey, yep, there's aliens here, and tomorrow they're going to be landing on the front lawn of the White House, and they're going to be coming in, and we're going to be starting some kind of negotiations." Um, I expect there would be some panic buying, but I don't think there would be general panic. But what do you think? I'm very curious and interested to hear what your opinion is. All right. So please smash the like button. If the YouTube algorithm brought you here and you're not one of my regular subscribers, please take a look at my titles. You'll see that I talk on a variety of subjects. I'm sure there's something out there you might find interesting and would get you to consider subscribing. If you know somebody who might find this video interesting, please share it with them. Thank you for spending time with me this evening. I hope to see you again in a future video.